Blood Money episode 60 with Krystal Ball. Left and right meet to discuss broken journalism. On this very special episode of Blood Money, Krystal Ball joins us to have a conversation from both the left and right point of view about the sorry state of journalism and what the future holds for journalism in America. All right, we're on the latest episode of Blood Money. Today we have a very special guest, Krystal Ball. How are you doing, Krystal?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. I'm really excited to have you on the show because I know this whole, what's happening in media, the fake news, exaggerated news, politicized news. I know this is a big topic for you. And so, let's just kind of dive right into it. I think people know your background. Your bio will be on the bottom here. So let's talk about all this misinformation, fake news, exaggerated news, and politicized news. What do you think's going on in the media right now?
I mean, I think it's the same story that we've had in the corporate media for a long time. Their incentives do not necessarily align with the incentives of a healthy functioning democracy. You know, when you have, especially on the cable news networks where money and ratings are king, they're worried about, advertisers. Their journalists are frequently worried about, I got to make sure I maintain my sources, I maintain the access that I need to get that next big story or to be invited to that next big cocktail party. And then there's also no accountability after the fact when people get significant things wrong, as long as it's in service of a sort of establishment narrative. So perfect example of this recently is, whatever you think of Trump and his relationship to Russia, certainly the P-tape was not a real thing. Okay. Nobody has gone back. Very few people have gone back and said, okay, our coverage was over the top. It was salacious. It was, basically like tabloid fodder. It was not based in fact. Where did we go wrong? How can we better serve our viewers, our audiences in the future? That sort of a soul-searching mea culpa never happened. And certainly any of the journalists who were pushing any of this, they've never seen any sort of accountability. And, one thing I wanted to raise with you, because I think it's really appropriate given this week, is that Sunday was 20 years since the invasion of Iraq. And, for me, this was a very formative political experience. That's how I end up, as like a dissonant voice on the left.
That's amazing, by the way, that you say that, because that's literally the impetus to why I started this in 2003 was the Iraq War.
Oh, wow.
Just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of people who, I was sort of like vaguely politically aware. And then you realize that this narrative is being spun from every single, liberal or conservative media, all consistent. And the way that we were just completely lied to, and that was devastating for our own people. It's obviously incredibly devastating for Iraqi civilians, completely upended the Middle East, still reverberating throughout our politics. It's the reason basically Barack Obama gets elected. It's the reason basically that Donald Trump gets elected. So there's real consequences here. And the one thing that I would say is, even after the Iraq War debacle, there was at least a little bit of soul searching. Okay, what did we do wrong? How do we fix this in the future? Clearly, they didn't actually learn those lessons, but now they don't even feel the need to acknowledge when they get things really totally blatantly wrong.
Yeah, it's insane. I mean, the Iraq War was a big eye-opening experience for me because I was actually born in Toronto, grew up in LA, but I actually lived through a civil war in Lebanon when I was a kid because my dad was a professor. And just the whole thing was really shocking to me. The fact that this became shock and awe, people sitting in front of their TVs, eating popcorn as literally bombs are falling and kids are dying. That was a really sad thing. And the fact that the people that did that were never prosecuted, that got away with it. I mean, it just seems like you're giving license to everybody to be corrupt, cruel, conscienceless. I mean, million people, something like died in Iraq and nothing's been done about it.
Well, and you ask, okay, well, how come there were no lessons learned and why is the media the way it is today? I mean, you think of some of the people who pushed the Iraq War most vociferously from pages of outlets like the New York Times or the Atlantic, or even liberal outlets like the New Republic or liberal outlets like the Atlantic. They're still wealthy, they're still powerful, they're still sought after experts on political talk shows and, for quotes in opinion columns, that some of them continue to be columnists. Thomas Friedman, still an op-ed columnist at the New York Times, the most prestigious outlet in the country, if not the world. So there's no price to be paid for journalists who are wrong and
Mhm.
catastrophically so in service of something that the US government and the establishment forces want. Now, the dissenters, on the other hand, famously Phil Donahue, who had the highest rated talk show at MSNBC at that point,
I love that you brought up
he
Phil
gets fired.
Donahue, by the way. I love that you brought that up because that was cancel culture at its worst, and George W. Bush, in my opinion, was actually the father of
That's a great
current
point.
cancel
That's
culture.
a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you dared question the decision to go to war in Iraq, you were unpatriotic, you were un-American, how dare you? And this was at a time when, of course, you know, the whole nation was horrified by what happened on 9/11, and that was really used to justify all sorts of course, government overreach, but also, you know, media overreach in this context. So, you know, I think a lot of the current era, there's a lot to learn, even, you know, that's still reflected now in the things that they get wrong and the total lack of accountability, and the fact that, hey, the people who were devastatingly wrong in some of the most crucial moments in American history and some of the worst mistakes we've ever made in American history, they didn't lose their jobs, they kept their power, and the voices of dissent were sidelined and dismissed. So where are the incentives? You know, what's the incentive structure ultimately?
Hollywood is a big issue, right? Because you're bringing back flashbacks right now. I remember when Michael Moore went on stage during the Oscars, won the Oscar, the whole audience booed him because he was talking smack about George W. Bush. And George W. Bush deserved that. He's a war criminal, if you ask me. I think he is a war criminal if you actually look at the law by the letter of the law and not talk about, you know, corrupt lawyers, judges that, you know, have really skewed the law. And you know, similar to that, we saw the Will Smith experience, which this dude slapped Chris Rock, and he had a standing ovation when he won the Oscars. And just to me, it's like the sheepish behavior. I mean, you're literally talking about just another brick in the wall when it comes to a lot of these Hollywood types that actually have the power to inform and really hold these people accountable. But, you know, that's not what happens.
Yeah, no, oftentimes it's not. I actually, it's funny, on our show Breaking Points, we played that Michael Moore clip today, so it's very fresh in my mind as well.
Wow.
And we also played a little bit of the Phil Donahue show where he was hosting Tim Robbins and Susan Sarandon, who actually were some lone, you know, courageous voices of dissent, because what we decided to do with regard to the 20-year of Iraq, you know, anniversary of the Iraq War invasion was there's a lot of retrospectives talking about the villains as we are now, but very few looking at, all right, well, who actually got it right and what happened with them? So there were some lonely voices, but there's no doubt if you were just interested in your career and your ambition, which direction you were going to go along with at that point.
Yeah, totally. I want to say something about the P-tape. I got an interesting story, quick story, right?
Okay.
I've actually met Donald Trump three times. The first time I met him was in 1998 at the Blade 2 or 3 premiere. I think it was either Blade 2, that movie with the vampire one, right? So I met him there. And I met him 2 more times at a place called International Jet Interior, because I was a full-time TV producer before going more independent, and I'd actually sold a show about basically Pimp My Plane, and it was Donald Trump's plane that was being in off the Ronkonkoma exit in Long Island is where the hangar where they were building Donald Trump's, the interior of his jet, right? So all 3 times that I met him, when I shook his hand, this man is a complete germaphobe. And so when I heard these tape things, because the way he shakes hands is really weird. It's like he kind of doesn't want to touch you, but he doesn't want to seem like Howard Hughes is, so he kind of goes for it. And I noticed in his, like, as he was running for office, like, he'd be really uncomfortable. He'd do this weird kind of slippy thing, and then he started getting more comfortable. I think people were telling him, dude, you look weird just like slipping your hand out. That's not a real handshake. So it almost made me seem bizarre. I'm like, there's no way this Howard Hughes germaphobe type of dude is like peeing on anyone.
Don't know what his kink is, but that was not a high contender on the list.
So how do we fix this madness? I mean, what do we do because this is destroying the country. It's tearing us apart. It's been doing it since, I mean, in my opinion, since the Fairness Doctrine went away. The 2000 election, I think, was one of the most divisive elections that really put the country on the brink. And since then, it seems to get worse and worse. So what do we do to fix this all?
I'm actually. Do you consider yourself a conservative, or do you position your politics?
I'm weird in the sense that I started off as a hardcore liberal. I grew up in Hollywood.
Okay.
I went to UCLA for school. I was actually, believe it or not, a Bernie Sanders supporter at one point before actually peeling the onions and realizing that was just a really bad idea, in my opinion. So now I'm more on the conservative side, but I tend to be liberal on a lot of topics too.
So you're kind of heterodox.
I don't really like to pinpoint myself as something, because like Chris Rock says, I'm liberal about certain things, I'm conservative about other things. I frankly don't give a crap about the transit agenda. If some people are 18, they could do whatever the hell they want. I don't like that kids are being attacked. So I get conservative when we're talking about 4-year-olds transitioning. But if you're 18, you could do whatever the hell you want, in my opinion. So yeah, that's.
I was just curious because I think a lot of conservatives, when the Fairness Doctrine was in place, many of them despised it because, they felt it was basically weaponized against them to keep their views off the air. It was always sort of a politically mixed view. I agree with you in terms of there were some real benefits at the time to the Fairness Doctrine. The whole idea was that, hey, there's a limited spectrum. These are public airwaves. You have a responsibility to the public to present both sides of the story. Unfortunately, at this point, I think it just wouldn't work, given the fact that we no longer have a limited spectrum. People like us can spout off on Rumble or YouTube or podcasts or wherever we want. So I think that the just bringing that back is probably not a workable solution at this point. But to be honest with you, I'm actually really hopeful in a sense about where the media landscape is heading, because we no longer have this monoculture of media where there's a few limited gatekeepers and brands that people pay attention to. And you can see this in the fact that, of course, media trust has fallen off a cliff. I mean, that really starts with the Iraq War and just keeps going downhill ever since. You can also see it in the fact that some of the things that there's been an almost uniform narrative about from the media, people just aren't accepting anymore. So lab leak is a perfect example, right? There's a really uniform narrative, at least coming from liberal media, about, hey, it's racist to even suggest that this could have leaked out of a lab, which was always silly and absurd. Majority of people didn't buy it and don't buy it and aren't gonna buy it. I also just actually saw a poll about how people feel about whether they're more sympathetic toward Israelis or Palestinians. Obviously, the Israeli perspective is overwhelmingly more represented on the American airwaves. They also are much more organized in terms of political power that they wield in Washington. And yet the American people, majority, said, actually, our sympathies are more with the Palestinians. So I think that's a sign that there's been a real shift in the way people consume media. I think it's a real opening to have a better model that is more accountable to the people and more and in greater service of a people's agenda and a true democracy than the corporate for-profit model that we've been leaning on for forever now. Now, one thing I'll say, and I'll raise this, and I'm curious your thoughts too. There's a danger in new and independent media, which obviously I'm a part of, you're a part of, and I'm a huge advocate for, which is if you see some creators who become more interested in trying to say what they think their audience wants them to say than in what they actually think. There is a problem with audience capture that we have to be aware of. I think there's the way to be aware of that is have diversified income streams. So, you're getting some revenue from, let's say, ad monetization on Rumble or YouTube or wherever. You're getting some revenue from your audience, so you are accountable to them, but you're not completely beholden to them. So I think that's a relatively easy thing to fix. The other piece that is a challenge is, it's one thing for us to have a nice little set or a little studio and say what we think about the news. It's a lot more expensive to have on-the-ground reporting. It's a lot more expensive to have investigative reporting. So I think as we shift into a new landscape that is more heavily dominated by independent spaces, I think we're going to have to be really creative about how we fund those sorts of things, which are absolutely indispensable and invaluable in terms of the functioning of a society.
Yeah, totally. Have you seen the movie Zodiac by any chance?
I haven't. No.
There was a very interesting moment there because it's all about these journalists that are trying to figure out who the Zodiac killer is. And this was, I guess, in the early 70s. And it's interesting because you see this shift in journalism, like all the people from the 60s, 50s that were now retiring in the early 70s were these hardcore journalists that were like, I mean, they were savages. They were going after the corruption and, really just kind of not playing this game of politics within the journalism world, right? And then within the movie, you see how these individuals now come in the new generation, and these guys are really most concerned about power and connections and all that stuff. And so there seems to have been definite shift there. And I wonder, I mean, could you guess why those shifts happened around that time, where kind of the integrity started to peel away and it became more about who you're hanging out with, connections, and all that kind of stuff?
What time period would that have been?
This was like early 70s, around the early to mid 70s when the Zodiac Killer first started. And David Fincher, the director, made a point to show that. So, and he's a very intelligent director. So I thought, there's something to this,
That's interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. Pinpointing it to that time, I'm not sure. I do think that you're onto something with the elimination of the fairness doctrine.
Mhm.
And, the rise of cable news has been extraordinarily deleterious in terms of the quality of political journalism and any kind of journalism, really, because it is just such a profit-driven model where that's the only thing that matters. And then, they make sure, and this is all Noam Chomsky, manufacturing consent, et cetera, but they make sure that the people that they keep on board are the ones who are going to be predictable and say and do the things that are, that are going to be comfortable for them and comfortable ultimately for advertisers. And this gets into a question about social media as well, which is complex too, which is, whoever owns, whether it's Elon or Zuckerberg or whoever it is, as long as they're ad-based models where that's the majority of their revenue, ultimately it's not the owner of these platforms that's really making the decisions. It's whatever the advertisers are comfortable with at that moment. And that's a horrible way to run a society. I mean, these are incredibly important channels just for the basic, democratic, small d democratic infrastructure. So, I think, like I said, I think there are some really hopeful things out there. We partner with, I'm a lefty, and this news outlet I'm about to call out or shout out is also, led by a lefty, but they are very even-handed about calling out corruption, following the money wherever it is on both sides of the aisle, which I think gives them a lot of credibility. But Lever News has been indispensable in terms of both the Silicon Valley bank bailout and looking at the way that corrupt legislators rolled back regulation that might have prevented this crisis. And they beat the mainstream press on that. And they also beat the mainstream press on the East Palestine train derailment, where they were the first to also identify, hey, here's where the Obama administration failed. Here's where the Trump administration screwed up. Here's where the Biden administration screwed up. Across 3 different administrations, we had basically rail industry lobbying and money that crafted regulations to their benefit. And then lo and behold, we have catastrophes like what unfolded ultimately in East Palestine. So I think that's incredibly encouraging that they're able to make a go of it as a completely reader-supported independent outlet.
Yeah, totally. You were mentioning the Israel-Palestine situation. Could I throw an idea out here? Just,
Sure.
what I think the solution is? It's all about land, right? And they have such a finite piece of land. I always thought, like, why don't they build islands in the water like Dubai is doing, and then you open up all this land? Like it seems to be working in Dubai. They have the technology. Why not? You create a whole bunch of land. Now land becomes less of an issue. I mean, is that a dumb idea?
Yeah. It's a very, in a way, it's a very rational idea, but in another way, it's a very, it's a very
naive.
It doesn't take into account human nature, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, you probably have wherever you live, you probably have an attachment to it. Yeah. I live literally in my hometown that I grew up with. So I am very irrationally, connected to and rooted in and, attached to this particular random little small town in Virginia that no one's ever heard of. So you can't just swap random new islands for what has been in people's lives and their families and their history for generations. So
yeah, it's such a mess.
Probably
sad mess, because I think people, because of emotions, they're just I don't see there being a solution because the emotions are so high, and they're both attached to the land. Both groups are. It's just such a tragic story. Julian Assange. Let's talk about Julian Assange.
Sure.
I'm definitely more on the right side now. I went through my own political kind of realization, and I'm more definitely on the Trump side, although I see a lot of flaws. And one of the flaws being that you go around and say fake news, fake news, fake news. And then you have this like king of fake news that expose all the BS that we went through in the Iraq war, that expose all the crimes against humanity. And this man is still in jail. This man doesn't get pardoned. That really bothers me.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I, really appreciate you as someone who, sees a lot that you like about Trump being able to say that, because a lot of people just put on their political hero worship blinders, and that's that. And come up with a million excuses why, he didn't do it was Jared or whatever. But I mean, on the flip side, as someone on the left, let me say that for all the Democrats moralizing about the free press, democracy, et cetera, here's Joe Biden, going forward with the prosecution. And back under the Obama-Biden administration, their initial view of Assange, and Obama absolutely hated Assange too, but they looked at the case and they said, we can't charge this guy without criminalizing all of journalism effectively. There is no way for us to draw a line between Julian Assange and the New York Times, who were, publishing some of the revelations from WikiLeaks. So they passed on prosecution for that reason. Now, those dynamics have not changed. And yet Joe Biden continues to move forward with, attempting to extradite Julian. And it is an absolute travesty. There's it's funny you bring him up. I actually just interviewed his brother and his father, Gabriel and John Shipton, for my show, Krystal Kyle Friends, last week. They were here in DC, so I got to see him in person, talking about a documentary they put together about their fight for Julian's freedom. And I think the number one thing that is paramount is, of course, the principle of protecting free speech, being true to the First Amendment, protecting journalism, protecting whistleblowers. Like, that's obviously the paramount of paramount importance. But what comes through in this documentary is, this is also a human being. This is a man whose life has been completely destroyed. They show him talking on the phone at bedtime with his young children, him trying to, sing songs and read stories with them. There's a lot, his wife, Stella, is in the documentary quite a bit. Obviously, his father and his other family members. And it's outrageous, but it's intentionally outrageous because they want to send a message to anyone else who's out there like him, who may, have
Andrew Tate.
hand them to see.
Sorry to interrupt you. Andrew Tate's another one, still in jail. We don't even know.
I don't know if I got it. That one I don't know the details of. It seems to me like he all but confessed to some of the things that he's being accused of. So I'll put that one to the side.
Okay.
But the intent with Julian is clearly to send a message, to chill free speech, to scare people from reporting things that were uncomfortable. For this, again, goes back to the Iraq War. Democrats came to not like Julian Assange because they thought he was working with Russia to help Trump or whatever nonsense they believed. But this has nothing to do with that. This prosecution is based on him and WikiLeaks revealing war crimes that were committed during the Iraq War. And once again, the people who were involved in committing and directing those war crimes scot-free. The man who exposed them sitting behind bars and could potentially spend the rest of his life behind bars.
So insane. It's absolutely so insane. I mean, we talked about the fairness doctrine, and it doesn't seem like you think that's a solution to it. What do you think about opinion in news? Because it seems like the news should just be the most boring version of this is what happened, you decide what happened. But yet we have these pundits sitting there talking about their opinion, kind of infusing lies within the news, because it's very hard to kind of differentiate between what is fact versus what is opinion.
Yes.
You got a way to fix this all, to basically have a legal classification where news is news. The minute you start spewing out opinion, fines, you could lose your license, whatever it is, just to make sure that the news stays news and opinion. And it's really clearly designated to be so as well, where it's like a pack of cigarettes, where it's you see the label, this is opinion, consume at your own risk,
It's not a bad idea, just in terms of, listen, I mean, the scary part of what you're suggesting is, the government and the media collaboration, the government and social media collaboration has not been good, but that a lot of that has also been done in secret, where there's zero public transparency and zero democratic accountability. What you're suggesting is getting democratic accountability back into the news gathering and holding news to account. And I think that there is some merit to that idea. What also gets complex, though, is it's not just, okay, here's the fact and then here's my opinion. Part of what shapes a narrative, too, is what you decide to focus on. And I'll give you a perfect example of that. So when we pull down of Afghanistan, and I have no idea what you think about this particular issue, but I think you'll agree with my general thesis here. When we pulled out of Afghanistan, there was a lot of coverage about, oh my God, what's going to happen to this country, the women, the girls, like this is going to be devastating for them. And Taliban's back in control. This is terrible. And there was a lot of humanitarian coverage, which I understand, because Americans, they want to do right by this country that we've fucked over for many years, et cetera. And so they tugged at our heartstrings. Okay. The minute that is all done, well, guess what? There's a huge famine in Afghanistan. We're complicit in it because we've basically stolen some of the funds that rightfully belong to their government. Not a word in terms of suddenly the media doesn't really care.
Yeah.
No worries. Suddenly the media doesn't really care about the women and girls anymore. When's the last time you heard about that? So it also matters a lot what you decide to cover. And you can see it very clearly in like the story selection between MSNBC and Fox, right? Fox News will cover, they'll cover what's going on at the border. They'll cover crime rates. MSNBC is going to focus on like the Trump prosecutions and anything like ridiculous and absurd he does. It's not that the one is necessarily lying about those other stories, although they may do that as well. But by choosing to focus their attention elsewhere, they're sending a very important signal to their audience. These are the stories that matter. And so that's as important ultimately for shaping opinion as what you say about it and how you cover it and whether or not you're inserting your opinions or not.
Is there, do you think we're going to see like the repair of trust in our media? You think this is ever coming back, or is it like, it's almost like all the old legacy media has to shed because they're irreparable at this point, which by the way,
irreparable.
I think that statement covers every industrial complex, our military industrial complex, our judicial lawyers, everything's screwed in my opinion. I think everything's so corrupt that it needs, in my opinion, needs a revision, especially the news media. But what is it? Is it like a bunch of new shows pop up that becomes a news media and the MSNs and CNNs go away, or?
I don't know that they go away, but I think they become and have already become much less important. And it's not just in the news media. We are in a sort of transformational pivot point phase where when I was growing up, there was more of like, a monoculture. Everybody kind of watched the same shows and there was a limited number of news stations and everybody's talking about the latest blockbuster movie. Well, there's a reason why the new blockbuster movie is like a rehash of Top Gun, right? It's like all nostalgia. There's a reason why the largest downloads in terms of music, it's all old music. It's all, again, nostalgia, because that sort of monoculture, just given the new social media and broader media landscape, like it's just all much more fractured and much more niche. So the question to me isn't really how do you reform these dinosaur legacy media institutions, because I think that's probably a losing battle. I think the more interesting question to me is how do you build something that is genuinely better than that? Because it's not, there's no guarantees that, the independent media direction we're going in, there's no guarantees that ends up being better. You have the challenges of audience capture. You have the challenges of, since we're all divided into niches, like playing to the most sensationalist parts of your audience and, getting a really hardcore, because one of the things that's rewarding in independent media isn't necessarily the size of your audience, but how bought in are they? Are they willing to send you that, $10 a month or whatever? So there are pitfalls there as well. And to me, that's the more thought-provoking question of how do we build something better outside of the legacy media institutions. I saw one idea. I don't know what you think of this. I'm sort of like still puzzling over it myself. But do you remember how Andrew Yang suggested this idea of democracy vouchers, where people would have a certain amount of money that they can contribute to political candidates, and they're just like,
kind of like France
thought,
does. France does that. You choose, I think in your taxes, you could choose where some of your money is going.
Oh, really?
They can say, yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I like that idea too. But
I do dig
yeah,
that. Yeah.
that's a good idea too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I saw an idea that was basically like you get similar like democracy voucher to put towards media outlets that you believe in, that you trust, that have done good work, etc. Again, as a way to get the American people and the citizenry actively engaged in, in media and in holding journalists to account. So I thought that was an interesting direction, because you also don't want independent media to just be geared towards those who can afford to pay whatever the price of admission is for for the Patreon or for the Substack or whatever.
Yeah. What are some of the shows or approaches with shows that you find intriguing, that you feel like are a step in the right direction? Is there any particular content that you feel like kind of does the bullseye for you?
I mean, obviously my own show.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, I'm obviously a little biased, but I will tell you, we were very intentional about the way we put Breaking Points together. First of all, the fact that I'm a lefty and Saagar has some more right-wing views, even though neither one of us is really, sort of doctrinary down the line. It on a daily basis, it forces me to engage with other opinions that, don't naturally come to. And it forces me to engage with an ecosystem that I otherwise could completely shut myself off from. And we've both had experiences where in an editorial call, we'll say, hey, what did you see this crazy thing or whatever? And the other one will be like, yeah, but did you see it? Like, that's not really what happened. And here's a backstory, whatever. And we're like, oh, it wasn't as advertised. But if we weren't there to check each other, we're human beings, we're fallible and all of that. Like, it could easily go down some silly bubble directions. And not to say that we're perfect even with that check, but I think that helps. That's number one.
Yeah.
Number two, we have, our number one source of revenue and most important to us is from our audience directly supporting us and believing in what we do. I think that's really important. But I think it's important that you have other sources of revenue too. So we have, a monetization with our podcast and monetization with the YouTube version. But our personal rule is we don't take any direct corporate sponsorships, because we don't want to be influenced by corporations whatsoever. We don't even want the appearance of that whatsoever. And we will never talk to an advertiser. So I have no idea what ads are running on the podcast. No clue. It's all completely arm's length, completely blind. We are able to say some categories that we don't want to advertise on our show. So we can be thinking about, like, for example, we say no pharmaceutical ads. But I think, and then the other piece that we've built in is we don't have the bandwidth to do the on the ground reporting and the investigative journalism and all that would be part of a full independent media ecosystem. We're small and we're new, so we don't have that bandwidth, but we partner with people we respect who are doing some of those things so that we can promote them on our network. We can have benefit of some of the reporting and some of the resources that they are utilizing. And hopefully everybody, it's not a zero-sum game. So hopefully we can all sort of build something together that way.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So glad that you guys are doing this work, because we are the new media. We are the new media. I don't know if the CNNs are going to disappear, but I have a feeling the kind of content we're doing is going to start filling the MSM somewhere. It could be years from now. It could be in the next, few months. But I think that, there's a void that has to be filled, really,
Yeah, I completely agree. And like I said, I'm kind of optimistic about it. I'm pretty hopeful about it. I think there's a real opportunity right now. And, I think Lever News that I mentioned does phenomenal work. I think, some of the reporting like Matt Taibbi's been doing. I think that, there's a number of people and outlets out there that are really trying to do something that's different. Matt is launching a new like complete outlet. So it'll be exciting to see what he does there. And I will also say, digging into like the SVB bailout, what's going on in terms of financial journalists, a bunch of great Substacks out there that have been invaluable to me as well in trying to understand what exactly is going on there. So
Yeah.
I don't think there's going to be a new mainstream in the same way. I think there's going to be a large ecosystem that hopefully, like I said, has better incentives, is more accountable to the people, and is ultimately a healthier ecosystem with a wide variety of views to, rebuild some of what has been lost in this country.
Totally. I'm down to my last two questions, by the way. I wanted to go back to Julian Assange. Now, when Julian Assange, they first started going after him, I recall that there was some kind of like sexual misconduct allegations, right?
Yeah.
Whatever happened to that? I mean, was that something that was just randomly being thrown out about?
Yeah, I think it was total bullshit. Is my understanding, and the charges were ultimately dropped. And it certainly appears Julian always denied the charges. I don't think they were able to really marshal any kind of evidence, and ultimately it was dropped. In retrospect, it definitely looks like this was just an attempt to prosecute him for something.
Do you think there's a weaponization of such false accusations when it comes to especially men in particular?
I mean, I think certainly at times. I think there was a real corrective that needed to happen in the Me Too era. Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby, Matt Lauer. You had all these guys who were, and not just men, but largely men, who were for decades known to be abusive, harassers, outright sexual, rapists. And they got away with it. And a lot of them, they got away with it because they were powerful and they had money. Media was complicit in some of this. Brendan Farrow can talk about that with regard to Harvey Weinstein and the connection there with Hillary Clinton. But the idea that you should just reflexively and uncritically believe one gender over another, it's just not fair. Ultimately, it's just not fair. So I think there was a real needed corrective when you look at the number of sexual assaults that went unprosecuted, the number of women who felt like they couldn't come forward, etc. But when you just go to the place of we're going to knee-jerk hashtag believe all women, then this becomes an absurd place to really stand. So, I think you have to evaluate each thing on its merits. Yeah. And, I think people deserve due process, and I think women deserve to, be supported. And I think they deserve to bring their claims and be taken seriously as well. But you could see in the Biden campaign, you could see the way that people were only interested in believing some women ultimately, because when Tara Reid came forward with a rape allegation that had some contemporaneous evidence to back it up against Joe Biden, this was completely shut out from the media, completely dismissed by the media. And that, among other things, I think exposed that, this hadn't been done in an even-handed way.
Totally, yeah. The Harvey Weinstein story is really interesting because everybody in Hollywood knew that was going on, and just like they sit there and clap after Will Smith slaps the crap out of somebody, like these guys were supporting Harvey Weinstein. Everybody knew. I mean, I grew up in Hollywood. Everybody knew what was going on, but nobody did anything. It was an elitist problem. That's the issue that I take, is because the elite get away with it, and then men across the board are defamed and they're toxic and this, that. Well, most men are not Harvey Weinstein. Most men are not doing the casting couch thing. And it just seems that there's more analysis needed in that topic, because if you're not Harvey Weinstein, and I've been in Harvey's office many times, met him like 20 years ago. It's the guy's a pervert. What can I say? I mean, it's like you couldn't have a woman walk in the room without his eyes, didn't have self-control, and everybody knew it, and whatever, they protected him. But
Epstein was a perfect example of that, right? Yeah. Who intentionally, he probably had his reasons to do this, cultivates this wealthy, powerful circle that protects him until he, becomes a danger to them, and then he kills himself.
Yeah, and it's pretty obvious to me. Those paintings, you have a painting of Bill Clinton with Monica Lewinsky's dress. You have paintings of George W. Bush flying little paper airplanes. I mean, that to me is clear-cut extortion. Like, that's what it looks like. Like, you know, MF, I have you on the wall. I know what you did, and you mess with me, and X, Y, and Z happens. That's what it seems like to me. But that's just, you know, my assumption, because a proper investigation was never done on the topic, you know?
And probably never will be.
Will never be. Yep. Last question. Is there anything we missed out on that you want to talk about? You know, the mic's yours. We do this every episode where, you know, if there's anything you want to tell the viewer.
Well, one thing that I will just shamelessly promote is I'm actually moderating a panel on, it's called Bad News, and it's about how the media lied us into war in Iraq. It's an interesting group. There's a one panelist who was one of the few journalists who actually was skeptical at the time, and he's still a great journalist for Reuters. He's been on the ground in Ukraine, and in the pre-call, he was talking about how, you know, it's really important people understand we don't have access to the Russian side of the story here. So you're getting, it's not necessarily a bias thing, but you're getting a limited picture, and that needs to be, you know, made clear to readers of your work. Another journalist who was dead wrong in terms of the Iraq war and completely did a 180 and a lot of soul searching after the fact of like, what the hell, how did I get this so wrong? And then someone who considers herself on the right and was a critic, which is really courageous, of the Iraq war from the right, because there were almost none of those at the time. So it's being hosted in partnership with the Quincy Institute. It's going to be at George Washington University. You can RSVP online. It's at 4 p.m. Eastern. And you can watch, you know, online or in person. So
awesome. What's the URL? We could put that on the bottom when we post this.
I'll send it to you. I think if you Google it, it'll come up. Or if you look at my Twitter, I've been posting about it. Twitter is at Krystal Ball. So you can find all the details there.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I mean, I give you so much credit for talking about the Iraq war. That was like that was basically my life-changing experience. The reason I got into all this, I was actually working in Hollywood, working underground behind the scenes without telling, because, you know, you're dealing with a bunch of sheep in Hollywood. You tell them, hey, I'm like on Michael Moore's side, you know, ready to, you know, I want like war crimes charges on Cheney and Bush, and they look at you like it's just too much for them. It's too much. They can't handle it.
They weren't ready. They weren't ready for that.
I was undercover for like 8 years, and before I was ready to reveal myself. So I love that you're doing that. I mean, that was a critical point in our history, and we're suffering, I think, the consequences of that until today, you know, unfortunately.
Huge ramifications. Huge. We will never be able to wrap our head around just how much that changed American and world history. So I enjoyed the conversation, though. Thank you so much. This was
awesome. Thank you so much for coming on Blood Money. And for the viewer, definitely check out our website, americahappens.com, where we're posting episodes every day, like the Joey Gilbert podcast, Mindy Robinson, who's producing 2 shows with us, and a whole lot more. I will see you on the next episode of Blood Money. Thank you very much.